Real quickly before I jump into the video, this month I'm participating in the G Fuel Code Madness competition, a spin-off of March Madness where there's a chance to make an espresso shaker cup a real thing. For now, until I'm eliminated, my code espresso is 30% off the entire site and 20% off on cans. Whether it's big or small, every code usage helps to keep that fight going towards that end goal of getting my own shaker cup. You absolutely do not have to, it's totally up to you, but if you want to support the chase for the first branded merchandise here on the channel, the link's in the description below. Truly appreciate the support if you take part, but anyways, let's get into the content. So I was going through some old footage the other day, cleaning out some files on my PC, and I stumbled across some footage from the multiplayer reveal for Modern Warfare, the pre-alpha build of the game, and the first time that we were able to record and post footage about it. I started to watch some of this and realized, wow, there's actually a lot that was different back then compared to now, so I wanted to share some of those big changes from the pre-alpha, then leading up to the alpha and even the beta with you today. This kind of stuff absolutely fascinates me, but if you'd like to see more of this, of course, feel free to let me know your thoughts down there in the comment section down below. I was still combing through and finding a wild amount of changes, far more than what we'll get to in this video, so if you'd like to see more as a follow-up, I'd be more than happy to share with you guys. Also, as we go along, what's some changes you enjoy, maybe you didn't enjoy and kind of wish they'd stayed, or anything in between. If you're new as well, be sure to hit that subscribe button for more behind-the-scenes looks like this, and of course to stay up to date with all things Modern Warfare on a daily basis. But anyways, let's jump into it. Firstly, I want to talk about one that I find incredibly interesting, that being the fact that the pre-alpha build that we had at the reveal, this build included not one, not two, but 3 weapon perks that were entirely removed by launch, and likely many of you guys probably didn't even know existed to begin with. These 3 perks being Burst Fire Enhanced, Dexterity, and Stance Training. Starting off that list with Burst Fire Enhanced, this one may seem a little bit odd because we do have the Burst Fire Select option as a weapon perk for some weapons in game, but that's just the base variation of it. The air quote enhanced was the integral part of this weapon perk when it was in the game. There was both Burst Fire and Burst Fire Enhanced in the game at that point as weapon perks. The key difference though came in the way of the fire rate. What's interesting is this would have been the only fire rate altering attachment or perk in the entirety of Modern Warfare outside of the weapon ammunition conversions that we see in game now. Things like your 9mm Parabellum rounds for the M4 help that fire faster, and things like your 10mm rounds on the MP5 make that shoot a tad slower. But when it comes to simply a rapid fire style attachment or perk like we've seen in the past, there's none that you'd be able to use in game. So when you consider a faster burst fire, that's an interesting proposal in Modern Warfare. Truth be told, I don't really see too many players utilizing the burst weapon perk as is, so maybe that's what prompted the enhanced version's removal, but it also could be something that, again, maybe because it would have been the only strictly fire rate altering attachment in game, it got removed. Either way, it's interesting to me, and even though I played at this event and with this build, I totally forgot it was a thing. Secondly, we have the perk of Dexterity. Now, Dexterity was a bit more of a niche weapon perk, as from the footage that I gathered and I had the ability to comb through going through the Gunsmith, it was only available on pistols, it seemed, assuming that's correct and I didn't miss it anywhere else. But Dexterity's description said, with training, it enables greater speed in combat, and it offered positives of an improved weapon reload speed and also improvements to the weapon swap speed. So this was kind of a hybrid perk that would allow for some freedom in other areas of customization for classes. This was essentially a hybrid between the existing sleight of hand weapon perk, which was still a thing back then, it didn't materialize as a result of the perk's removal, and as well a combination with the perk of Amped, again, something that was around even back then. That would have been an interesting impact on the meta, I think, because you gain 2 perks for 1 weapon perk slot, and as a result also free up the option for a perk 3 selection, given that you don't really care about the integrated rocket reload speed with Amped. That may have altered the game significantly if it wasn't removed. And lastly, of the 3 perks that you may never have known about is something called Stance Training. And this was one that I was quite curious about the removal on in today's time. You'll understand in a second, but Stance Training at the time of the MP reveal in the pre-alpha build of the game offered greater accuracy in supported positions in the way of added recoil control when crouched or prone in game. Now, to my knowledge, this didn't make it to the full build of the game that shipped in October because at that time of launch, crouching and going prone gave increased recoil control, decreasing the amount you'd have greatly on any weapon. It didn't matter if it was an M4, a PKM, a Dragunov, the stance actually helped your shot and how you controlled it to add a sense of realism. For whatever reason though, that feature was removed about 2 weeks into the game's lifespan, and if you compare shots now, you shouldn't see any difference, but if there's any at all, it's minimal. So coming back to my opening statement on the perk, with the removal of the natural stance recoil mitigation, I think it'd be incredibly useful to have this as a weapon perk, to give players the conscious option to sacrifice something they may be able to help out their gunplay in another form to be able to use that stance to their advantage once again. But anyways, let's talk about perks a little further, but instead actually the tier 1, 2, and 3 perks that we have now, but in ways you may not be familiar with them. Currently, our perk selection looks like this. Perk 1 has Double Time, EOD, Scavenger, Cold-Blooded, Kill Chain, and Quick Fix. Perk 2 has Restock, Hardline, Overkill, High Alert, Ghost, and Point Man. And Perk 3 has Tune-Up, Amped, Shrapnel, Battle Hardened, Spotter, and Tracker. Just recently, a few of those perks actually were moved around, and we now have where they're at compared to where they were at launch. But what if I told you that's not the first time that we saw perk redesign or rebalance like that? While the pre-alpha build didn't showcase all of the perks, there's of course still stuff that needed to be debuted between August and of course the launch in October. There were a few significant changes to that list. In August of last year, Tracker and Tune-Up were perk 1 selections, and Cold-Blooded was a perk 3 selection. While I don't think that either of those are terribly meta shifting, I certainly would imagine that something like Tracker may have changed the flow of the game pre-patch if the only things that were really putting up a fight in the tier 1 selection with it were EOD and Overkill. Post-patch, who knows the effect of things, since of course Overkill was moved to tier 2, but an interesting thought in my opinion. Next, let's jump over to the Gunsmith, the feature that admittedly I think they were most keen on showcasing at that MP reveal and with the pre-alpha build. There was a ton to customize in Modern Warfare even back then, when only about half the items were shown in the Gunsmith. Firstly, back then, attachments were displayed in a more tile-centric format with images for the icons and nothing else. Currently, you have the name and a smaller icon next to it in a longer rectangular format, but beforehand, it was simply just a square image with a depiction of what it did and the name of it to the right. I think that the current system is more streamlined from a UI perspective or user interface perspective, but I'm not gonna lie, I remember liking this layout from the pre-alpha when we played it back then. Additionally, some icons are completely different, but some were also placeholders at the time. You'll notice there's a few icons that do resemble current AK-47 attachments or something else on a different weapon, so some of those were used in multiple locations at the time, which again is normal for that developmental stage. But also talking about attachments, let's discuss how different some attachments actually were in the pre-alpha. Firstly, in the naming category, there were dozens of attachments that do not match where they're at currently. For some examples, the M16 Grenadier M4 barrel was known as the lightweight barrel back then. The M4 FSS 11.5 Commando barrel was known as the short barrel, which also it may seem like the previous long barrel turned into the Corvus Custom Marksman, but also had a design change with it slightly. The Commando foregrip was previously known as the angled foregrip. The 60-round magazine was the high-capacity extended mags. The lightweight suppressor was simply the small suppressor. The 50GS Forged Tack Enforcer barrel was the long slide, which, fun fact, there were actually 3 barrels for the 50GS in the pre-alpha, but now there's only 2, and so on and so forth. So you see that there's a bunch of stuff that doesn't match up with the current naming. That stuff, though, is kind of natural. It's cool to look back and be like, whoa, that was a different name. But from a pre-alpha standpoint, the big key focuses at those times are to make sure the game is functional, working properly, and showcases enough of the maps, weapons, and Gunsmith, and all else in between well enough to get the message across to the world about what's coming. The naming was kind of trivial, but it's still pretty interesting to look at if you ask me. Additionally, with the Gunsmith came of course the new display on what changes with each attachment. While some of these descriptions aren't right, for the most part they're at least a general display of what the attachment will do. Though in the pre-alpha, these were actually altered slightly. For example, the M16 Grenadier barrel we just mentioned for the M4 only offer up a positive of quicker aim down sight speed at the cost of sacrificing some damage range and bullet velocity, which is a complete flip of what it actually offers in today's build. Additionally, things like the rear grips actually offered a bit more in the way of ADS speed bonuses. We had at the time the labeled stippled, granulated, and rubber grip tapes, naming only slightly deviating from where we are today, but the bonuses were a bit different. Previously, the stippled grip tape actually used to help only the aim walking speed at the expense of the ADS speed, but now the stippled grip tape is actually the only grip that will increase ADS speed. Additionally, both the granulated and rubber grips in the pre-alpha helped the ADS speeds, whereas now they help aiming stability and recoil control with no speed adjustments. The attachments also in their displays were a bit different in the pre-alpha as well. Currently, we see of course those positive and negative icons on the attachment displays and information. Whether or not they're entirely accurate or do exactly what they say, that's of course always an open discussion, but in the way of how they were displayed, it was a bit different. Currently, the max we see is 1 positive or 1 negative icon with each listed change. However, in the pre-alpha, we had plenty of times where you'd find a double positive icon mixed in with a singular icon for another effect. This denoted that was a heavier emphasis on on that specific change with the higher number of plus or minus icons for the changes that were being made, but you also had a couple of other ones mixed in there. They just may not be the biggest. That can go for both positive and negatives. Perhaps you really lost out on something, but there was another drawback. You'd see a double negative emphasized on the bigger drawback. Rarely, though, you'd actually find one that had a few drawbacks and only offered, say, one major positive change, and that would be denoted with a triple positive icon. Personally, I like this because it emphasized the bigger changes. Sometimes may wonder which is the primary positive or negative with an attachment, which to my knowledge, they're listed by importance sequentially, but this would have been an immediate recognition thing, I think, visually. Moving along to the last thing I want to talk about from the pre-alpha is one that's a little bit simpler, that being the fact that when you looked at weapons in the Gunsmith, there was no preview animation with it. You could take away any HUD elements and spin the weapon around, but the animation where if you double tap to inspect the weapon in today's Gunsmith, it would bring up a little cinematic showcasing the weapon that wasn't there at the time. This was just simply bare bones, and again, that comes down to the functionality of it. It wasn't the big key importance for showing it off for the very first time. After that, though, let's jump over to a little bit of the alpha and then the beta. One thing I want to talk about with the alpha, which was the 2v2 gunfight alpha, there was no other MP for 6v6, 10v10, or ground war or anything like that. The alpha was simply a surprise release of an open playable build of the gunfight 2v2 game mode. It was only available to PlayStation 4 and it was only around for a short period of time, but at a point just before this went live to everybody, there was an alpha build of gunfight that showcased the attachment list for weapons whenever you spawned in. Whenever each round started, you had this extended display that showcased every attachment that would be on that current build. Personally, I thought that was awesome, and still to this day, you still can't really tell all that much sometimes what attachments are on weapons, and so this just helps you to easily understand, and also if you really liked something, you could directly take that build and translate it to whatever you want to use in game. Love that feature, don't know why it was removed. Then finally closing out the video with some beta adjustments and changes that were made since then. Firstly, let's talk about again the Gunsmith a little bit. There were a couple of UI elements that got improved upon, but also are still way different compared to now. Firstly, if you looked at where you could see the weapon progression and check that, I believe you could go up to rank 31 for weapon attachments. And so to see what you'd be unlocking next as you progress through that, you'd end up having to use your triangle button. This is now the right trigger. And finally, there's also the number of attachments, however many you use out of 5. That was in the upper left as well, condensed up there with that weapon level. That's now in the lower left. And finally, one feature that is not around anymore is that of in the beta, you could have colored create a class names. You probably could have in the builds before this, but because we didn't have anything available to us in the alpha to create a class, and nobody really checked this in the small invite only group of the MP reveal, we didn't really know about this. But if you ended up putting the caret icon and then any numbers 0 through 9 at the start of your class's name when renaming it, you could change the color of the displayed create a class in menus and even in game. Very similar to how you previously could change the regiment clan tag as of recently, but you could do it on console as well. So that was a cool little feature that I don't know why it got removed, but unfortunately it did. That's gonna round out this video. 10 changes here from pre-alpha all the way up through beta, and then compared to where they are now with the full game. Couple of months in. Love to get your thoughts and feedback though down there in the comment section down below. Is there anything in particular you guys really enjoyed here out of this? Any change you wish never was made, or anything in between? Let me know. But that said, hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to drop a like down below, and of course if you are new to the channel, make sure you guys subscribe so you don't miss a single thing regarding all things Modern Warfare, updates, news, information, tips, tricks, all that good stuff we got you covered here on the channel. So hit that subscribe button if it interests you, and also if you guys want to get connected a little further, Bracket live on both Twitter and Instagram, so links are down there in the description below. But let's get out of the way. Thank you guys all so much for watching. I'm Gunsmith Espresso. I'll see you guys later. Take care and peace.